tennis fans, to a special Friday edition of Changeover Chat in the TennisONE app. I'm Randy Master, and today we welcome to the show 22-time Grand Slam champion, Olympic gold medalist, 2002 inductee into the International Tennis Hall of Fame, the legend of Lutherville, Pam Shriver. Pam, thanks so much for coming on.
Thanks, Randy. It reminds me when Bud Collins coined that nickname. He had two for me. I think it was the Great Whomping Crane and the Legend of Lutherville. So hats off, and always remember Bud Collins as one of the great jewels of tennis.
Absolutely. So, Pam, it's a very little known fact that you and I actually met in 1980. I grew up in Richmond, Virginia. I was 10 years old. I was a ball boy at the Central Fidelity Bank Invitational. Remember that event?
Was that at University of Richmond?
It was at University of Richmond. I was a net runner. Also played back. And all I remember is that I was a little bit afraid of you when I was one of the, I think there were two back people in each corner at that time. But every time I would kind of toss one a little low, you'd kind of smack it to the side, not in a like McEnroe kind of way, but
Djokovic.
Oh, that's a great one. Do you remember that tournament at all? It was great for me. We had tennis in Richmond.
I played a lot of junior tennis in Richmond. Having grown up in Baltimore, Richmond was sort of the capital of USTA Mid-Atlantic. We had all our major sectional tournaments down at Bird Park, where of course Arthur Ashe played a lot of his tennis when he was younger. I do remember that. I think Martina and I may have won the doubles, or maybe that was the year before we started playing doubles together, but I feel like Martina maybe won the singles there that year.
Yeah, I looked it up. You played with Ann Smith in doubles, and you lost to a formidable team of Martina and Billie Jean King. I think it was three in the third.
Oh, wow. Thanks. I didn't remember that. I do remember later on in 1980 playing in the finals of the US Open against Martina and Billie Jean with Betty Stova in what was Betty's last tournament. And we got to the finals and we lost 6-6. And so it's funny you bring up that Richmond loss in the finals with Ann Smith, 6-3 in the third, and then I think those two matches were probably two of the main matches that made Martina, like a month or two later, pick up the phone and ask me to start playing with her in January 1981.
Sure. Well, when I think back to that tournament in Richmond, we also had a men's tournament, the United Virginia Bank Classic, that Bjorn Borg would come to, John McEnroe, Vitas. It brings you back to a time, because I was a junior tennis player at that time, and to see all these legends in Richmond as a junior tennis player, we would get so excited for it. It would have a big impact on us as we looked up to all of these players. We wanted to become tennis players. Where have all these tournaments gone? Because I think, and I talked to Bob Moran the other day, he says the same thing, professional tennis events in communities raise the game in every possible way, grassroots and junior tennis, and it gives youngsters role models and people to look up to. So where do they all go? Where have they all gone? And it's a big deal, I think, when you're a junior tennis player, especially.
Sure. Well, back in 1980, certainly the women's tennis circuit, the WTA, which was now about 10 years old. In fact, I have a picture of the original 9 over my shoulder, which really was when the 9 women signed contracts that started the women's tennis tour, because they were getting like 10 cents the dollar from the mainly men leadership establishment in the early days of pro tennis. So then the Virginia Slims Tour started, and then people started to own tournaments. So it was very U.S. centric, because we were a country that was more open to female athletes, women's tennis players, because Billie Jean King was from here. I don't know, it started in the U.S. So the properties, the tournaments were owned primarily by U.S. tournament directors. And they were there, they invested, a lot of them invested their own money. Then, with each passing decade, tennis has become more global. The ITF's goal, the International Tennis Federation's goal, is to spread tennis around the world. So you bring up a good point. Having a pro tournament in your community really does help grow tennis. But meanwhile, as it became more popular globally and women's professional sports became more popular, then these tournaments became an entity that other countries wanted. So then it's the same old buying and selling. So, I mean, if we had a map of the tournaments back in 80 and then 90 and then say 2000 every 10 years, you would just see it spread across the globe. And unfortunately for our country, it means a lot less tournaments in many, many fewer communities like Richmond. They don't have a tournament anymore.
Sure. Well, the tournament that has gone on for quite a long time, the US Open, you made it to, you look at 1980 here, you obviously, it's a match that everyone remembers. In 1978, the Open moves to Flushing Meadow from Forest Hills. You're a 16-year-old McDonough High School in Baltimore. You find yourself on center court, Armstrong, at the US Open in Flushing. You beat Martina in the semi 6-6, and then you are on the biggest stage in tennis, playing Chris Evert in the final. Can you bring me back to that day, Pam? I watched the match on YouTube this morning. I was 8, so I kind of remember it, but can you take me back to that day? I watched it this morning. It was electric. Summerall, was in the booth, and I think Billie Jean came into the booth. It seemed like such a massive stage for a 16-year-old.
Well, 1978, kind of to put it into perspective, I think it was maybe in the middle of the tennis boom. So tennis was really popular. Our finals was supposed to be played on this Saturday, but because Chrissy, the second semi after I beat Martina, and there was a couple rain delays in my win over Martina, Chrissy didn't beat Wendy Turnbull until Saturday. So therefore, our match got pushed to Sunday as a double header with the men's final. So it was Evert, Shriver at 4 o'clock, followed by McEnroe against Connors. And no, excuse me, Borg Connors. So anyway, it was McEnroe the next year in '79 when he beat. But that was quite an afternoon for an amateur. I was the last amateur finalist at a major, 16, still the youngest finalist. Tracy Austin would win it the next year as a 16-year-old in 10 months. But anyway, it was something else. I mean, I obviously you don't all of a sudden wake up and you're in the finals of the US Open. It happens during a 2-week period. And I actually went out on the court. I'd never played Chrissy in singles before. I'd played her in doubles. But I remember being pretty nervous until I held my first service game. And then I realized that my pressure game, even though I'd get past a lot, that if I served well and I stuck to my strategy of trying to come to net behind great quality stuff, that I had a chance. I just think I probably didn't believe quite enough. And Chrissy was really, I've watched the YouTube highlights a few times. But it's contrasting styles, and I couldn't have beaten her by staying at the back of the court. So I had to come forward.
Sure. Well, when I watched that match, I mean, I know how you played. I remember how you played both on the doubles court and the singles court. It brought me back to that, it was a slice forehand, which is, it's not a shot used. Yeah. I mean, it's not used. I mean, Jimmy could hit it.
Perankova here at the US Open.
Yeah. And then you obviously slice your backhand. But one thing that I noticed is I kept waiting for you to come in on your serve every time. You didn't come in on your serve every time, but after about 3 or 4 exchanges, I knew that I could tell that you had to get in playing Chris. But was that style something that you adopted for the rest of your career?
Well, I was taught by an Australian coach who traveled the world circuit in the 50s. And growing up in Australia, they learned the serve volley game, the chip and charge. He taught me from the very beginning, if anybody hits you a weak second serve, you're all over it. You're immediately getting into the offensive position. You're going to treat it like an approach shot, because a weak second serve, especially back in like the late 70s in women's tennis, it probably was coming. We didn't have speed guns back then, but it was probably coming 60 miles an hour, and it was dropping in the middle of the service box. So it was likely to be one of the shortest balls you'd have in the rally. So I would just use it as an approach shot and try and come to net behind. I wouldn't try and hit an outright winner, but at 6'1", I position myself at net. Always had one of the best overheads, and I had really solid volleys. That was always the strength of my game. So it was like, okay, see if you can pass me 6 times out of 10, because I don't think you can. Chris Evert had the precision. She also had a great lob. So, she only beat me 17 straight times before I finally got her. But it was a style of play that was right for my size and my talents.
Sure. And when you look at that attacking style, and you cover the game as closely as anyone on the men's and women's side, you just don't see it very often at all. And I know that, John McEnroe and you, for instance, and Martina, I always kind of question, why didn't they get her on that ball? Why didn't they serve volley on that point? Why has the game changed so much where you look like you're playing a different sport if you play that style?
Yeah, well, I think, you can look at everything from rackets, the equipment, the string, the way that it's much easier to hit extreme topspin. When you serve and volley and somebody can crack a return with a kind of spin that, say, a Dominic Thiem or Rafa Nadal, and it's moving in the air the way it is, it makes volleying, makes that first volley a lot tougher. But I maintain that things are swinging back, the pendulum's swinging back. I'm not saying we're going to get back to, look, the other thing was surface has changed a lot. There used to be 3 of the 4 majors were on a grass court, and serve volley was really the style of play that was best on a grass court, particularly sometimes at Forest Hills, the Australian Open. The grass courts weren't as good as, say, the grass courts at Wimbledon. So the more balls you could hit in the air, it was just smarter tennis.
Yeah.
Then it changed. I mean, first U.S. Open changed to clay for 3 years, and then it went to Flushing Meadow on hard courts. The Australian Open, starting in 1988, moved away, played on the rebound ace courts for the first time, so it moved away from grass. So there's been a lot of reasons why the game has changed, and it's more suited towards, sort of the aggressive baseliner. But to me, I see more and more of the women now taking advantage of short balls, playing better all-court tennis, the way Azarenka took her all-court game to the finals of the U.S. Open. So I'm heartened. I think tennis is actually more interesting now than it was 10 to 15 years ago.
Yeah, and there's so many. We could talk about so many different American women that, I don't know, there might be 10 right now that could ultimately win a Grand Slam. Instead of talking about all of them, I'd like to talk about Jen Brady, because I knew her game a bit. We covered on TennisONE, we covered the WTA tournament in Lexington, and I got a really close look at her. Didn't think she would make a run to the semis of the U.S. Open. I am so impressed with her, and she seems like she has the attitude to win a slam. Do you agree?
Well, I think the evolution of her game the last couple of years, if she can keep that same trajectory of, yes, she can. Actually, if she can just maintain the level she played at the U.S. Open, she'll be in it with a chance. That's been obviously the issue with too many of women who touch the top or have a breakout major, is how do they follow it up? Many of them have struggled. I mean, we're wondering right now, it's obviously such a crazy year, 2020, with the pandemic and the shutdown. And I knew the shutdown had a chance. When I thought about who could it hurt the most, my heart, I really felt for Sophia Kenin, who had just won the Australian Open and gotten to 4 in the world. And I was just like, she seemed like she was on such a great momentum, and then she had no way to sort of back it up. And, the fact she lost in Rome, love is just shocking, even though it's to Azarenka, an informed player. It's just shocking based on how she played in Melbourne. So, yeah, there's a lot of, I'd say Jen Brady, as far as the weapons on her forehand and also her serve, Her backhand's greatly improved, but the thing that's improved the most is her mental ability, her emotional, the highs and lows are much more flat, and she's gotten so much fitter. And it seems like she's found the right coach combination, which I hope in women's tennis we're going to see an era where people stay with their coaches for a lot longer, because that to me has really hurt a lot of careers, all these major transitions like different coaches.
Sure. Well, let's just quickly, every conversation about tennis, especially with somebody like you, Pam, it's got to get into politics a bit, which it's not my favorite subject. You know, if I don't hear about tennis politics for a week, I feel like I've hit the lottery. But I've talked to people who still say that they're members of the ATP Player Council, which I don't even know if that actually exists anymore, that still feel like the men's game props up the women's game. I looked this morning, and this is just one part of it. I looked this morning, the last 6 US Open finals on ESPN, the women outrated the men in 4 of them, and the last 4. And you look at stats like this and you're like, who could possibly think it's ludicrous? Anybody that I've spoken with, men or women, tournament directors at men's tournaments, women's tournaments, it's insane. And love to hear your thoughts on how that can still be the case. And the second part of the question, and I don't want to you don't need to elaborate too much, is can there ever be a merger?
Well, there's a lot in those 2 questions. First off, obviously in the United States, going back to some of the things I spoke about, the original 9, the Virginia Slims Tour, how US Open agreed to equal prize money in 73. So the United States has had a real leg up in treating, in the case of professional tennis, men and women equally. Other places around the world, because of cultural ideals and just the way things develop, it's a lot slower. So it's more of an emerging market for women's tennis, women's sports in parts of the world. But let me tell you, if you talk to lots of investors, they'll tell you the smart money sometimes goes to the emerging markets, because they know that's the growth. That's the growth area. I look at men and women in the tennis world as a tremendous partnership, and have since I started in 1978. I look at since 78, so that's like 42 years, where there have been times where they've kind of been pretty equal as far as interests. There's been times actually where the women have had the most interesting athletes in the storylines and the matches, the quality of the matches. And the men were kind of like, but so here we are, having been through the best part of 15 years of the Federer, Nadal, Djokovic, Murray sneaking in there. This era is one of the greatest eras in men's tennis history. And while Serena has certainly been the predominant female, consistent and all-time great champion, she kind of hasn't had a consistent rival that stayed in the game through that period of time.
Sure.
So there's a lot of reasons why the men, if you were a young tennis player male right now, of course, you're going to say, well, you know, the era of Nadal, Djokovic, and Federer, but guess what? Those 3 have propped up men's tennis too. They haven't just propped up, you know, they've carried the flag. But guess what? Things turn, and you can sort of get a little glimpse of what happened at the US Open by seeing the quality of the women's matches, the quality of the storylines throughout the whole tournament, and then kind of look what happened on the men's side. And I know there were a lot of good reasons. You know, Rogers' surgery, Rafa didn't want to play because of COVID, and all of a sudden Novak, because of one impulsive bad luck move, you know, gets him defaulted from the tournament. And suddenly you've got men that are not used to being in that position, who most of them got tight and didn't play to their best. We saw great drama, but a lot of people were like, wow, you know, there was no question the quality of the women's play was better than the men's play. But the point is, it's a partnership. What other sport? And there's no other sport that has this partnership. So instead of playing one off the other and getting competitive, the merger should happen. The second the merger happens, you get the attention of the 4 majors, the ITF, other sports entities like you've never gotten it before. And I just don't understand. I'm not in the inside. I know what's happening much more on the inside of the women's game. I don't know really what the men are thinking right now. To not think in 2020, given everything going on, that a joint, a merged male and female player, whatever you want to call it, entity, wouldn't just be the way to go.
Sure. And yeah, we could talk for a day about that specifically, but in the interest of time, I want to go into something near and dear to your heart. Pam, you're someone that gives back to not only tennis, but with the USTA Foundation, but a variety of other charities. Can you talk a little bit about the various charities that you're involved in, or at least the ones that you spend the most time with, and how fulfilling that's been for you?
Sure, thanks, Rini. I also want to kind of talk about how I manage my charitable side of things, because I think it's really important for anybody really who has the wherewithal to really be smart about it. So that's like tax-wise, not to make sure that your philanthropic dollar is getting its biggest bang for its buck. So one of the things I did 30 years ago is I set up a donor-advised fund. So like, for instance, if I had a great year on the tennis court and I earned a lot more prize money, I would put more money into my donor advised fund as a charitable gift. And that money could sit in my donor advised fund for a year, 2 years, 3 years, or I could immediately decide from my donor advised fund, I'd like to give to cystic fibrosis, I'd like to give to type 1 diabetes, my favorite tennis charities, the International Tennis Hall of Fame, First Break Academy, the Heart of LA, Kennedy Krieger Institute in Maryland, who knows? Figure it out, but now it's more, instead of prize money, if I happen to, like I had this conversation the other day with my financial advisor, okay, what are some stocks that have appreciated that if I put it in my donor advised fund, I don't have to take the tax hit later on. So it's just a smart way of that. There's that whole side. So it's sort of managing your charitable dollars in a smart way. Okay, then it's who you decide both to give your time to. So I give my time in a couple different areas. Tennis charities that mean a lot to me. My kids' schools. And then, like, my oldest son has type 1 diabetes. So I might choose to spend a little bit more time with JDRF, for example. I've had really, my oldest sister died of cancer. My late husband died of cancer. I might decide to help a cancer fundraiser. It all depends. A lot of different things have affected. Look, this year with COVID and social justice, you end up wanting to volunteer, or you volunteer and you give some money. Last night I was on a call for Big Brothers and Big Sisters, a great mentor program all over the country, but the chapter here in Los Angeles. So I don't know. Sometimes I think I should be more focused, like the way maybe Andre Agassi has been with his foundation, just super focused on just a school or a foundation. But I found it's kind of like my attention. I kind of go all over the place. So that's where my charitable time and what treasure I do have. I'm no Bill and Melinda Gates, but I do enjoy giving my fair share away.
Well, it's great to hear, and I knew that you were obviously involved with the USTA Foundation, and looking on your website this morning, it was so much deeper than that. So you can certainly be commended for how much you do for these important charities, Pam, and spending so much of your time with them.
Well, and never more than now, right? I mean, it's not just ones that are related to, say, COVID or the amount of homeless people because of the economy or the social justice causes, but it's also charities that you've been involved with for decades. They're not able to have their usual fundraising efforts. We're all stretched a little bit at the moment with, a lot of people's incomes are down. So it's a difficult time, and everyone has to kind of be creative on how they're appealing to people. I love what the USTA Foundation did. I think it's called Rally to Rebuild. I think was the name of it. But you got to really come up with what makes it important still to give to NJTL chapters that help with after-school programs, tennis and education programs for kids. And maybe these after-school programs, and now maybe some are happening across the country, but maybe some, the kids still have to mostly stay at home, at which point maybe you just help them with some tutoring, drop off some food, just figure out how to reinvent yourself during this crazy year, maybe 2 years that we're going through.
Sure. And Pam, just to raise the enjoyment of the conversation, these are obviously tough things for everyone to talk about, but we're all making a difference, as you said. I wanted to finish with a trivia question that involves you. I was looking at Steve Flink's book, The Greatest Matches of All Time, and Steve named you as having the 5th best overhead in the history of women's tennis. That's quite an honor, because that's a shot that's hit by a lot of players.
Yeah.
Who do you know the 4 players that Steve ranked ahead of you?
And this is male or female, or is this just female?
These are all female players.
Well, Rosie Casals might be ahead of me based on, okay.
She's
all right,
not.
Navratilova will be there.
Okay, she's there.
Billie Jean King might be there.
She's not on this one.
It's interesting. Greatest overhead, Althea Gibson. Did he go back in history?
He did, but it wasn't Althea.
Alice Marble.
The players you mentioned are on a lot of other lists that Steve created, but this was so you have one. You just need 3 more.
It's a little disappointing. Can you give me a hint, like a country?
Yes. Well, I can tell you that
Is there an Australian? Margaret Court. Is Margaret Court on there?
Okay, so you have.
Is there a second Australian on there? No.
No, but both of their names start with M.
Their last names?
I'm sorry. First names start with M.
Margaret Osborne DuPont.
Okay, that's another one. And now, besides you, there's only one more. Another first name that starts with an M.
Not Maureen Connolly Brinker, because she was known as more of a baseliner. So it would be Maria Bueno.
Yes, you got it.
Wow. I mean, thank God for the hints.
Maybe
it's funny, I actually have Steve Flink's book, but I couldn't get it. I wasn't quite sure where it was. I didn't want to cheat that much.
All right, Pam, this has been a lot of fun.
One quick thing on my overhead. The Hall of Famer Ted Tingling is a tennis historian. I remember one time I finished a match that he was watching, and he said to me, Pam, I've never seen anybody hit more overheads away for winners than you do. So I guess that was one of the reasons why I got in Steve's top 5.
Well, I'll look for you in some of the other lists. I was flipping through, and all of a sudden I saw your name. So
Max might be in the top 10, but other than that, footwork would be in the bottom 10.
All right, Pam, this is it's been a lot of fun, and it's been a pleasure for me and an honor to speak with you.
Well, thanks a lot. I enjoyed it.